So I have the pleasure of introducing you to Jake Wood, executive chairman of Team Rubicon. So Jake is an award-winning entrepreneur, two-time author, and recognized expert on topics of leadership, organizational culture, and crisis management. Wood recently founded Groundswell, a revolutionary venture-backed financial technology company that is looking to disrupt philanthropy and employee compensation by making personal charitable foundations as common as the 401k. Groundswell believes that everyone should be able to give like Gates, get taxed like Buffett, and get recognized like Rockefeller. I love that. Wood is also the founder and executive chairman of Team Rubicon, the fastest growing and most innovative disaster response organization in the world. We're huge fans of Team Rubicon here at Sparkrock. Since 2010, Team Rubicon has grown to over 150,000 volunteers, responded to nearly 1,000 crises around the world and the United States. Under Wood's leadership, Team Rubicon developed a reputation for its corporate culture and was named one of the top nonprofits to work for in America 5 times. That's pretty incredible. Prior to Team Rubicon, Wood served as a Marine Corps scout sniper with combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and was a varsity football player for the Wisconsin Badgers. If anyone's a fan of Wisconsin Badgers here.
It's American.
He is the author.
American football.
There you go. He is the author of Once a Warrior, which I will personally endorse. Amazing book. I told Jake this. Really incredible. Everybody get a copy. Expense it on Sparkrock. Great book. Recommend you read it. It's a memoir detailing his time in war and disaster zones around the world that legendary journalist Tom Brokaw said was the book America needs right now. And I agree with Tom Brokaw. So thank you, Jake. Welcome to Sparkrock. Thank you for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation to come and join you all. Thank you for the partnership that we have been developing between our organizations over the past year. I know Team Rubicon is better poised for success because of the work it's been doing with your platform. So thank you for that. I was asked to come in and really just, I guess, talk a little bit about leadership and organizational culture, and I'll do that for the next 25 or 30 minutes, and then we can, feel free to open it up to any questions that you might have. I'm happy to make this a discussion. I'm not. My goal here is not to sit up here and preach to you as much as it is to share with you some of the stories of the last 20 to 30 years of my life, and through those stories convey some of the lessons that I have learned in building teams and leading teams through hard moments. And make no mistake, we've been in a hard moment for 18 straight months, and unfortunately, it may be getting harder before it gets better with this new variant. So let's dig in. Let's dig in. So, I mentioned I would use this story to share some of these lessons with you. And my story begins about 30 years ago. So I was born in the United States. I grew up kind of moving around a little bit. And when I was 6 years old, my dad took a job in Austria, of all places. And so in 1989, my family moved from Texas to Austria, which was a really fascinating time to be living there. The Berlin Wall was coming down. The Soviet Union was on the verge of collapse. And, all of these things were happening all around us. And I was just old enough to understand that big things were happening, but of course, just young enough that I couldn't quite comprehend what they were. But it helped to give me this unique perspective on how connected the world is. But, of all the lessons that I learned from my time in Europe, I think the most powerful lesson I learned came the day that my family took me to this place. So this place is a place in northern Austria called Mauthausen. And during World War II, it served as a concentration camp run by the Nazis. It's a terrible place. Tens of thousands of Jews were slaughtered inside these walls. And, there were powerful moments throughout this tour that we took of Mauthausen. I remember seeing the ovens that, young children my own age had been slid into and burned, and, the gas chambers where they and their mothers had been ruthlessly killed and slaughtered. And it was powerful for me because as a young boy, I first really understood just the the depths to which humans could sink. And that was really an eye-opening experience for a young boy whose sense of evil prior to that had been, Wile E. Coyote cartoons. And so the most important lesson, though, was less this notion of discovering what actual evil was, and more when I came to the last exhibit of Mauthausen, which was the story of the liberation of the camp, when Patton's army, broke through the lines and was able to liberate the last remaining Jewish prisoners of Mauthausen. And there were these black and white photographs of these Americans riding in on jeeps and on tanks, and treating these survivors with such compassion and empathy and dignity. And it was this powerful moment because I realized that these men that had sailed across the Atlantic, to go fight, in a country they'd never been to help people that they'd never met, was just this powerful lesson of service and selflessness, and had this huge impact on me at a young age. And I remember, leaving Mauthausen and thinking, like, that's the type of person that I wanted to be when I grew up. And so sure enough, my family eventually moved back to the US. And for the next 10 years, that was kind of my goal. That was my dream. That was the purpose that I thought that I had in life. I was going to grow up and I was going to join the US military, just like those men that I'd seen in those photographs. While I was in high school, I hit a growth spurt and had a couple of really good football seasons. And so I started to get recruited to go and play football at major universities. And so my senior year, I had this decision to make. I could either follow this path, of service and sacrifice and going and doing what I'd always had this calling inside my head to go do, or I could go and I could play football and really just try to go and pursue something that was really just about me, about trying to get to the NFL, about trying to get rich and, playing in front of cheering crowds. And, I like to joke that I had really incredible parents that, I would like to think raised a really well-rounded and grounded young man. But I did what any 18-year-old would do, and I decided to go and play football. Turns out I was not a very good football player. This was probably the wrong career choice because I ended up not being as good as I thought I was. But I learned a ton of incredible lessons while I was at Wisconsin playing football. I played there for 4 years. I learned a ton about hard work, about teamwork, about humility, about what the discipline that it takes to be the best. But the most important or powerful lesson that I had in my time on campus happened my freshman year. I woke up one morning, I walked into the cafeteria to get ready and get some food before practice, and I saw a bunch of students huddled around a TV screen. And as I walked up behind them, I saw as the second plane hit the World Trade Center. And, we all remember where we were when that moment happened on 9/11. But for me, this was a moment where I instantly knew that we were at war. And I knew that if I had rewound my life 9 months, that I had made the wrong choice when I decided to go to Wisconsin and play football instead of join the military and serve my country. And I felt this urge to go and join in that moment. But what did I do? I swallowed that urge and I went to practice that afternoon. And then that weekend, we played a football game. And every weekend for the next couple of weeks, as young men and women, really no different than me, marched off to war, first in Afghanistan and then to Iraq, I got really good at making excuses for why somebody else could go and fight that fight. And I watched, from the comfort of my living room on campus as these wars unfolded. And again, feeling that urge, but always, finding a way to suppress it, never finding the courage to make the tough choice. And then right before my senior year, Pat Tillman, a professional football player who joined the Army after 9/11, was killed in Afghanistan. And that was a galvanizing moment for me. I looked in the mirror and I said, that's the type of person that I want to be, when I grow up. I want to be a man of conviction, someone who makes the tough choices regardless of personal costs. And so I ended up, after my senior year, joining the Marine Corps. I ended up enlisting into the Marines. And in 2007, I was sent to Iraq as part of the surge. And, this was a really challenging tour. 2007 would end up being the bloodiest year of the war. My unit was deployed to an area of Iraq known as the Triangle of Death. And so it was a very challenging time. About 2 weeks into that deployment, my unit was on a routine patrol out in some Iraqi fields when the lead vehicle in our 4-truck convoy hit a roadside bomb crossing a bridge. And, I remember watching as I was in the third vehicle as that truck started to burn. And I remember opening my door and my feet hitting the ground. And I can remember still to this day the feeling of that heat wave from the flames hitting my face and the smell, that putrid smell of cordite from the explosion filling my nostrils. And I watched as one of the Marines from the truck, who had been unscathed, got out and he was yanking on the front passenger side door. He was yanking, and finally he opened it up, and out tumbled this Marine. And that Marine that tumbled out onto the ground was Sergeant Rosenberger. Sergeant Rosenberger was our squad leader. He was the one who had taught me everything that I needed to know about being a Marine. He was the one who was responsible for keeping me safe, for getting me home, for leading us through that challenging tour. And I saw him pick himself up, dust himself off, and march back across this bridge to where I stood. And as he approached, I looked down. I saw that he had this horrific wound on his leg. But when he finally got to me, he didn't ask me to help him with his leg. Instead, he asked for a radio. Now, why did he ask for a radio? Because in that moment, he didn't care about himself. All he cared about was his sacred responsibility as a leader, and that was to take care of the rest of us. And so I handed him that radio, and he began coordinating for backup forces to come in, for a medevac helicopter to come in. And, as he was doing that, I ran to the bridge with one of our medics. And unfortunately, the driver of that vehicle had perished, a gentleman by the name of Lance Corporal Blake Howie. And, about an hour later, a helicopter came in, pulled us out. Sergeant Rosenberger ended up being sent home to the States, and I got promoted a few days later to the rank of corporal, and I was given charge of Sergeant Rosenberger's squad. And so here I am, 2 or 3 weeks into my first combat tour. The one who was supposed to take care of me has been sent home, and I find myself in charge of 13 Marines. And if I was being honest with myself, I didn't know anything about leadership. As much as I thought I knew, if I'd had a mirror to look into, I would have realized that just a scared little boy was looking back at me. And I, over the next 7 months, learned a lifetime's worth of lessons in leadership. And I could sit up here and I could speak for hours about all those lessons and what they were, but I'll boil down everything that I learned into one simple thing. Leadership at its core, at its simplest, is just this: it's love. Leadership is about loving and truly caring about the people that you lead, demonstrating to them that you will do anything and everything in your power to assist them in their personal journey, their professional journey, that you will put their needs in front of your own. And when you think about it, that's a really exhausting job for a leader. And so many leaders are unwilling to actually take and make that emotional investment in the people that they're leading. But you know what? The people that you're leading, your followers, they know when you're just mailing it in. They know when you would just as readily put your footprint on their back as you're climbing the corporate rung. They'll know if you're going to throw them in front of the bus if they make a misstep. So in order to save your own skin. But if you can demonstrate that type of caring that I'm talking about, then you can unlock extraordinary talents within them. When I think about what it took for me to wake up 13 men every night and ask them to put on these boots and pick up dusty rifles and go back out on one more patrol, it wasn't just because I outranked them. It was because they knew that I was going to do anything for them in that moment. And here's what's incredible. When you have this sense of love, this shared love within a team, it creates this really powerful compounding effect, because this sense of love leads to this sense of safety. And what's crazy to me is I often talk to corporate at corporate events, and every once in a while, it's rare, but every once in a while I'll have a leader say, "Oh, I don't want my people to feel safe, because when people feel safe, they feel complacent." And that just always blows my mind, because I actually think that when people feel safe, they get courageous. I think safety unlocks this sense of courage, because if people have this sense of emotional and psychological safety, if they feel that they're going to be taken care of, then they're more willing to step out and take these risks, these chances that every leader wants to see their people taking, to give their organization that edge that is necessary in innovation, in scaling, in capturing market share. But so often people, they think that this courage comes from, some innate thing within an individual. I just argue no. I think that it's in these moments of danger when, on the battlefield, the bullets are flying, people have this relative sense of safety. They have it because they know that if they get hurt by demonstrating this courage, if they run across that field and they get hit, that this relative sense of safety, knowing that there would be 13 Marines that would line up to go and get them. Again, they might be in mortal danger. They may not actually be safe, but psychologically, emotionally, they actually feel safe because they know that the people they're with will do everything to take care of them, that's what unlocks courage. And you only get here by demonstrating this in every action, every communication that you take with the people that you're leading. Now, I was lucky to come back from Iraq. I was brought into a sniper platoon and ended up going to sniper school, which was, a challenging experience. It's the hardest school in the Marine Corps. It's got a 60 to 70% failure rate. I was very lucky to be able to pass. And upon graduation, I was deployed to Afghanistan in a 6-man sniper team. And this was a really challenging tour. We were in Afghanistan tasked with tracking and hunting Taliban and insurgent forces. And that's as challenging as you can imagine. And so often we were surrounded by ambiguity, not just in the literal sense, the fog of war, but also in the figurative sense, in the moral sense. So many of the decisions that we faced on a daily basis really challenged us in how we had to judge that situation and make the right decision. And I was very fortunate because the leader that I was following on that journey, that deployment, was a gentleman named Sergeant Sean Beidler. And Sean had this incredible moral compass, and I often, since leaving the Marine Corps, I think about these virtues that, we often talk about in the abstract, things like integrity or respect or trust. To me, these virtues are universal human norms, but they're so hard for people to demonstrate in those challenging moments when things seem ambiguous. And, someone else that's been very important in my life once told me, he said, Jake, what's right is always right, and what's wrong is never right. And it was such a simple way of stating the obvious. And what I've come to learn is that most moments that we find to be ambiguous, and I'm talking about moments that seemingly challenge our values, right? We tend to think of them as gray, but in reality, they're often not. They are often black and white. There are often very clear right and wrong decisions. It's just that often the right ones feel like bad decisions because they're going to come at some sort of personal cost. And so instead of thinking of them as black and white, we like to think of them as gray. We like to make excuses, and we like to find reasons why we put something in front of our integrity. Might be profit, might be our own personal safety or comfort, it doesn't matter what it might be, but we sometimes find ourselves justifying doing this. And I was very fortunate that in this life and death situation where every single day we were making life and death decisions, my leader so resolutely committed himself, and as a result, our team and us, to his virtues, to this virtuous style of leadership. And as a result, I was able to come home with my conscience clean. And that was such a relief for me. And what I found is that so often it's easy for us to find leaders who will make missteps here. And just, always keep this in the back of your mind, the famous Warren Buffett saying, it takes a lifetime to build a reputation, and it takes one decision, one moment to destroy it. The people that you're leading, they don't care about the 99 times that you lead with integrity. They care about that one moment that you sell out your integrity or the team's integrity for something, whatever it might be. So always remember, you have to bat 1,000 here, right? You have to be 100% here in order to lead effectively. That's a heavy charge. So I ended up coming out of the Marine Corps. I made the tough decision to get out after my first 4 years, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And shortly after getting out of the Marine Corps, this event happened. This is the Haiti earthquake. I watched this moment unfold, and honestly, I felt like it just reminded me of my time overseas and in service. The destruction, the chaos, the helplessness, the immense amount of need. And so I ended up organizing a team of fellow Marines and doctors, and we went down to Port-au-Prince just a few days after the earthquake. And we ended up running these mobile medical triage clinics all throughout the city, basically leveraging all of the skills and all the experiences that we gained in service to help these people on their worst day. And after about 2 or 3 weeks on the ground, we came to realize that everything that we were doing was just reapplying the lessons learned on the battlefields to help these people in their greatest time of need. And so you can imagine that we sat there and started to think about what if we committed ourselves to trying to build a disaster response organization, a better version of a disaster response organization by recruiting men and women coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan to do this work. And so we came home after 3 weeks on the ground in Port-au-Prince, and we incorporated this as Team Rubicon, which it sounds like many, if not most, or all of you are now familiar with. So those were the not so humble beginnings. And over the course of the last 11 and a half years, this organization has scaled from a ragtag group of 8 volunteers trudging their way into Port-au-Prince, Haiti, to a global organization of over 150,000 volunteers responding to literally hundreds of disasters and crises annually. And if you think about what we actually do, we bring people together that have often never met one another. We send them to a community or country that they've never been to in the aftermath of some disaster, some chaotic situation, which brings with it limited resources, limited information, all of the inherent dangers of a disaster zone, all of the confusion that comes with those chaotic moments. And we ask those individuals to come together as a team and perform at the highest level in the pursuit of these really impactful and imperative objectives. So if you boil it down, Team Rubicon at its core has been a laboratory for building teams and leading through crisis. There's literally not a more challenging leadership environment on the planet than what we've been able to do over the last 10 years. And we've been able to do it with a frightening level of success and frequency in that time. And if you boil down the lessons that we've learned, they're often very simple. And I'm going to share some of the simplest lessons with you here for the next 10 minutes so that you can get a better understanding. And though these may be simple lessons, please understand that excellence comes from excellence in the basics, the blocking and tackling. That's how you become a best-in-class organization. So I hope you'll take these not as simple lessons, but rather as critical needs for any leader in any organization. And so it starts with a vision. Any leader knows that his or her primary or first and foremost responsibility is to establish a vision for the team. Where are we going? Now, often when I talk about vision at Team Rubicon, I talk about writing the final chapter first. And that's because I love talking about storytelling in Team Rubicon. And so if you think about stories, or if you think about your organization rather, your organization is really nothing but a story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's got a plot line. It's got characters, mostly protagonists, but understand that they're going to be antagonists. They're going to be people that are working counter to the vision that you have. There's going to be plot twists, unexpected turns. There's going to hopefully be triumph. There might even be a couple of failures. But at the end of the day, this is a story. And so that vision is really that final chapter. What's the resolution that you're driving towards? So that when somebody looks back upon the history of your organization, they close that book and they say, what is it that they say that you accomplished? So think about this vision in terms of storytelling. Now, when we came back from Haiti, we said that we want to build the best disaster response organization in the world. Now, granted, that was a pretty bold thing for a couple of young, dumb Marines that had never built anything before to say. But this vision that we set out had all the key elements of an effective vision. It was simple. There's nothing ambiguous about this language. It was bold. We're saying we want to be the best in the world. And finally, it's relatable. The people that heard this, that were a part of our organization, they understood how their efforts were contributing to us becoming the best in the world. And so those 3 elements, simple, bold, and relatable, that's really the foundation of any effective vision statement. But frankly, those are really easy to accomplish. Writing simply, it should not be that hard. Being bold, say you want to be the best in the world, but let's also be realistic. Like if you're not actually competing on a global landscape, do you want to be the best in your industry, in your sector, in your niche? Do you want to be, capture X% of market share? What is it? Be realistic in how you create that boldness, but nonetheless, make it bold. And then finally, relatable. If it's not speaking to the people who are hearing it, then it's actually not an effective tool. But again, this is the easy part of creating a vision. So let's talk about what the hard part is. So this is a vision from Southwest Airlines. Phenomenal company, highly regarded, written about ad nauseum. People talk about Southwest Airlines all the time, and for good reason. They're a phenomenal company. Now, their vision is to become the world's most loved, most flown, and most profitable airline. Now, what's interesting here is, as you can see, it's got all those 3 elements. It's very simple. It's clearly bold. They're talking about owning 3 different components of their industry, and it's relatable. I think people could understand how what they're doing works to accomplish this. But what's interesting here is if I had not shown you that this was Southwest Airlines, I probably could have convinced you that it was any one of the major carriers. I probably could have convinced you it was American or United or Delta. And you probably would have said, sure, because of course you would have thought, well, who doesn't want to become most flown, most loved, most profitable? But here's where it gets challenging, because you can say that you want to be something like the most loved. You can say it. It's really easy to say that. It's really hard to align every single decision that you make, every action that you take, and every resource that you allocate to that statement. And this is where leaders fall off. Because again, it's really easy to make a statement. It's really hard to back it up with your actions. And so if United or American or Delta had said they wanted to be the most loved, their employees and their customers would have instantly called BS the moment they started implementing all of those policies that clearly are not aimed at creating a sense of, I love this company. Change fees, check bag fees, the way that their flight attendants treat passengers, dragging them off the airplane by their hair, versus you have a Southwest Airlines that eschewed all of the industry norms, didn't charge these change fees, the check bag fees, who allowed their employees to have fun on the flights and crack jokes on the intercom. All of these things that they've become known for, dressing up in costumes on Halloween. This was an organizational culture that was built on the spirit of having fun, under the belief that profits and mileage would follow afterwards. So again, aligning every single decision, action, resource, that's the hard part of setting a vision for a leader. Now, I'll end by saying Southwest did this they were so committed to this that when they finally went public on the New York Stock Exchange, they went public under the stock ticker symbol LOVE. So that's a company, that's a leadership team that truly backs up their vision with their actions. From there, you have to go out and you have to find the people that are going to, be that team, because no single person can do this alone. Every good leader knows that. I call it going out and finding the nine. That's because when I give the longer version of this talk, I use this analogy, or this parable rather, from an old Greek philosopher who talks about the types of people that go into battle. And these nine are the people that we can count on to win the battle for us. So, when we got back from Haiti and we started to build out our staff, we came up with this phrase. We really thought long and hard about what's the type of person that we want. We didn't think about what are the qualifications that we need, what's the resume look like, what's their pedigree. We said, what is the type of individual that we want on this team? And we said, we want individuals who are foolish enough to think they can change the world and only just smart enough to have a chance. And that's been in every single job description that we've posted over the last decade, hiring hundreds and hundreds of people under this. And we knew that this would serve as a litmus test. We knew that people would read this and they would either say, these guys are taking themselves way too seriously, I want nothing to do with it, or they would say, that's me. That's the type of organization that speaks to me, because that's the type of person that I am. So very early on, we always talked about what's the type of person that we want, rather than what's the qualifications or the pedigree or the resume that we're looking for. Now, after that, as we were thinking about, as I was thinking about the hiring these people, the temptation as a young entrepreneur, first-time entrepreneur, is to hire people who are measurably less talented than you. I was always lacking confidence that I could hire talented people as a young first-time entrepreneur, and that they would listen and follow my leadership. And what happens when you do that is you create this organization that slowly hollows out, because the people that you hire under that construct, they're going to follow your lead, and they're going to turn around and they're going to hire people that are measurably less talented than them, and so on and so forth, until you find that you have this degradation of talent all throughout the ranks of your organization. And so instead, I made the choice that I was going to hire people around me who were measurably better than me in nearly every regard. I was going to have the humility to acknowledge that I didn't have all of the answers, and that I needed all the help that I could get. And in fact, in hiring these people that were so talented, I created a litmus test for myself in the interview process. I would ask myself two questions near the end of the interview. The first question was, if I had called this person on January 14th, 2010, would they have dropped everything to follow me to Haiti? Did they have that sense, that foolish sense that they could change the world, that they would do that? Would they have been willing to follow me into one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes of the last 100 years? And most often, if they'd gotten to that point in the interview, as I was reflecting on that question, the answer was yes. But then I would flip that question on its head. And I would say, if that person had called me on January 14th, 2010, and asked me to follow him or her, did they have the values? Did they have the competency, the judgment that I would have put my life in their hands and followed them into one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes of the last 100 years? And it was only if I would have followed them into Haiti that I would bring them on the team. That was the level of leadership that I was looking for all these people. And, so I surrounded myself with these incredible individuals who challenged me every single day. And often when people think about building teams like that, they get concerned because they say, well, how do I actually then align that person to the vision? How do I get that person to subject themselves to something bigger than themselves and not, fight for their own interests? And this is where I think we come back to storytelling. I think it's such a powerful tool, so often underutilized in a leader's toolkit. When you think about storytelling, think about the fact that ever since we've created the campfire and the spoken word, human beings have just sat around fires and told stories. We tell stories about our history. We tell stories about things we can't explain. We tell stories to relate to one another. We tell stories to make each other laugh. We tell stories to, relay our own accomplishments. And if people are being honest with themselves, when they lay in bed at night, they think about their life in terms of a story. They imagine themselves as part of something bigger than themselves. And what's crazy is going back to organizations being nothing but a story. If you treat the people in your organization like they're just inconsequential characters in the story of that team, that's how they're going to show up to work every single day. But if you treat people like the heroes of the story of your organization, they're going to show up and they're going to act like heroes. They're going to take those chances. They're going to have that sense of safety that I spoke about earlier. And they're going to come out and they're going to, uniformly and resolutely align themselves to that common vision. They're going to work together again because they want to be that protagonist in that story. They want to help to get that narrative arc to that final chapter. So I always encourage leaders to think about storytelling and treat the people that they're leading as heroes in the story of that team or that organization in the pursuit of that vision. So think long and hard about what storytelling might be able to do for you. And then finally, I love talking about culture, and it's hard to distill a conversation about culture into the time that we have, but I'll talk a little bit about how I frame it. So at Team Rubicon, this is how I talk about culture. Culture guides decisions in the absence of orders. So when people haven't been told explicitly what to do, the culture should consistently guide them to the right decision. Now, that only matters if you already have a vision in place and they know where they're going, but this allows organizations to empower their people to act more swiftly, to be more nimble in the face of a shifting landscape, if you have a culture that can consistently get people to the right thing. So how do you build that? So here's the formula we use at Team Rubicon. It starts with that virtuous leadership. I talked about my time in Afghanistan. At the end of the day, it starts at the top. And if your leadership is not demonstrating the virtues that you want to see, you're going to be rotten from the core. So it starts there. And then it's vision. Again, your people can't make the right decision consistently if they don't know where they're trying to go. And then finally, you can hire for culture early, but this is hard to scale, right? It's really hard to scale. And so eventually you have to imbue the organization itself with the culture so that you can really bring in almost anyone who is somewhat culturally aligned and assimilate them into the values and the way that your organization operates. So how do you do that? Well, it starts with values. Now, the difference between virtues and values, these are universally held across any culture, any society. Your values are how those virtues manifest themselves uniquely in your organization. So let's just take as a premise that every society across the planet values something like trust or respect. But trust and respect mean different things in different cultures. And so what they mean for Sparkrock is it has to be explicitly outlined. What does trust mean at Sparkrock? Well, let's define that. What does respect mean at Sparkrock? A great example of how this might differ is let's talk about respect. In some organizations, in some cultures, respect is avoiding confrontation and hard conversations. In others, that level of candor, telling someone when they've upset you, telling someone when they have failed you, is the ultimate sign of respect. I respect you enough to have this hard conversation. But again, you have to define that. You can't leave that to chance. And then you have to build the functions of an organization to reinforce that. So the policies, the processes, the practices, the pay reward scale, I call them the 4 Ps. And those things, just like a vision, they have to reinforce those values. So if you say one thing, we value, this is how we value trust in our organization, but you have a policy that directly contradicts that and makes people say, they don't actually trust me. They're not empowering me. Now you've created this disconnect. And now what you've done is you've eroded the power of your culture. So I spent a lot of time when I was CEO of Team Rubicon looking at everything that we were doing here and trying to identify the places in which we were creating a gap between what we said we valued and what we were doing in practice. Now, ultimately, again, this should lead to actions and outcomes. And I like to say that every single outcome that an organization achieves has a culture that was perfectly designed to achieve it. So if you're having great outcomes, good, your culture's leading to it. If you're getting consistently bad outcomes within a team, a department, an organization, go and diagnose the culture. There is a reason that you're getting to that outcome, and it's going to be cultural as much as it is, something that, Six Sigma is going to lead you to. And then how do you scale that? And it comes back to storytelling. We talk a lot about the history, the ceremonies, and the artifacts. Those are like elements. Those are tools to use in storytelling. How does your culture, manifest itself in an artifact? For Team Rubicon, it's our uniform. It's our gray shirt. That's the most sacred artifact that we have, and we hold that in such high regard. And we have people see that as really the manifestation of our values into a physical object. There's real power in using tools like that for organizations. Who does this very well is the military. And that's where I really saw firsthand the power of storytelling in these ceremonies and these moments, really, in driving and reinforcing this culture all throughout this loop right here. And then, well, I guess actually that's the conclusion of it. I'm really eager to open it up to questions. Before I do, I just wanted to say that none of this matters. None of this matters if you're not willing then at this point in time to empower your people. If you've set a vision, if you've created a culture of safety or a sense of safety that's leading to that courage, if you have found the right talent on your team, if you've built a culture that's going to guide their decisions in the absence of orders, but you're then not willing to empower them in that moment of consequence, then none of it matters. It was all a waste of time. So in that moment of consequence, as a leader, don't be a step back and push your team forward to execute. So again, like I said, eager to take any questions that you have, and I'll open it up. I've got about 10 minutes that I can I guess till about 10 minutes before the hour. So let's get as many as we can in.
Fantastic. Hey, Jake, it's Colin Dickinson. I am the president and CEO here at Sparkrock, and wow, very powerful. Thank you. It was super interesting. It reminded me there's a great book called Turn the Ship Around by Captain David Marquette. Mm-hmm. And he talks about intent-based leadership and about, a lot of the things. It aligns very well with a lot of the stuff about having people be the heroes within your organization, and making sure that you bring the leadership to the information rather than the information to the leadership. And we need to make sure that there are smarter people than guys in your position and my position who are closer to the actual problem, and they can help deal with it. But I'm curious as to how that has played out for you in your in your career. When you had to assume that leadership position at a young age. Was there that focus on making sure that you were, kind of creating the space for your teammates, your squad mates to supply that information? Did you see that even above you?
Yeah, I think that from early on in Team Rubicon, we were creating this sense of empowerment. And the Marine Corps had this philosophy that developed in the late 90s called the strategic corporal, which was basically an approach to, a belief that the future wars, and this is again in the 90s, so pre 9/11, they said in future wars, we're going to have to trust a 19 or 20-year-old corporal with making truly strategic decisions on the battlefield, untethered from a commanding officer, that could have wide-ranging implications and consequences at a strategic or operational level. And that was going to terrify generals and colonels to think that this 19 or 20-year-old, who may or may not even be a high school graduate, is going to be a person that is going to have to be empowered to make these decisions. But the Marine Corps bought into this premise of what future battlefields would look like. They began investing in this concept of the strategic corporal. And lo and behold, that's exactly how the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan played out. And so we took that approach early at Team Rubicon, which is we are never going to scale if we tightly try to control the decision making within the organization. We're going to have to create a distributed network of leaders who are trained to a minimum threshold of what we do and how we do it, and who ultimately are empowered, obviously within certain limitations, left and right lateral limits of the organization, to make these strategic decisions. And that is how we were able to facilitate scale early. There's always a tension that develops out of that. And there's this great Harvard Business Review article, it's 40 years old, called The Evolution and Revolution of Organizations as They Grow, which is mandatory reading inside Team Rubicon, that talks about this how this happens over time. And it's been a remarkable roadmap for us as we've scaled.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jake. I hope there are a lot of people taking notes on that and going grabbing that HBR article. I know there's I want to move fairly quickly because there's a lot of people that are dying to ask you questions. I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Demand Gen, Micheline, because I know that she has a question for you.
Sure.
Oh, hey, Jake. Sorry, I just put it in the comments. I was wondering how you handle the situation when you're not quite clear on the vision yet. Like the examples you're giving, you're dead clear, and I can see how you're always making great decisions. But when you're still coming to the idea of your next vision, how do you handle that?
Well, I mean, I guess I struggle to understand how you can be absent of vision, right? Are you talking about just that, you're in the midst of a strategic shift and you're not quite clear on what's next? I mean, there has to be a vision, right? And understand that there can be visions nested within visions. There's phase lines or objectives, whatever you want to call it. Like, here's the milestones that we're trying to achieve in the pursuit of this big overarching long-term vision, which done right, there's no finish line on. And so, these milestones are important, but, at the conclusion of a milestone, or at the accomplishment of a milestone, in the absence of another milestone, which, by the way, there should always be another milestone, you just revert back to that global, call it global vision. So, I mean, I would say that if you find yourself absent a vision, you're probably not looking in the right place, because there probably is one that can keep you in maybe call it a holding pattern until that next one arrives. And I see somebody put the HBR article link in there. Appreciate you doing that. Phenomenal. Make it mandatory reading for Sparkrock. It'll shed a lot of light, I think, in some of the organizational development you might be going through.
Perfect. I think your nesting answer is exactly where I was going, is nesting within the vision. I'm going to turn it over to Bethany. She has her hand up.
Thanks, Mish. Hi, Jake. So I'm just sort of digesting the incredible stories that you just told. I'm the VP of People and Culture here. So I'm wondering, how did you support your people who their job was to support other people? How did you support your employees through the pandemic and what they were dealing with personally?
Yeah, it's hard, particularly in a, if done right, people are so resolutely committed to the organization's success that it's often at the expense of their own well-being, right? And so you really have to be careful for that, because you're trying to achieve that level of commitment to the organization, but of course you have to be familiar with the dark underbelly of that. And so, one of our cultural values is change your socks. Probably doesn't mean anything to anyone on this call, but it harkens to this military, this moment in military leadership training, when if you're on a forced march, you're marching 25 miles under packs or whatever, you're taking a break. The first thing that a leader does is order his or her troops to take their boots and socks off. And the leader goes and looks at everybody's feet to make sure that they're not getting blisters. And it's as gross as it sounds. They've been marching for 12 miles and you're now handling a dozen people's feet. But then, you're checking on their well-being. Nothing will knock somebody out of a hike faster than a blister. And you're then telling them to change their socks. Take care of your feet because your feet are going to take care of you. And so we took that, and so we had this change your socks mentality. And it's both a reminder to our leaders to, hey, go and inspect feet. And be intrusive, right? So nothing is more intrusive than going and grabbing someone's feet and sticking them up, to your face. So be an intrusive leader that's checking in on people. And by the way, that helps also to demonstrate that you care, going back to the love, safety, courage. And it can't just be a cursory intrusion. It's got to be, we use the word intrusive for a reason. And then get them to change their socks. And that might mean taking some time off. It might mean taking some of their workload and passing it off if they've got too much on their plate. But that's the philosophy that we've taken. Now, you can't just write that down. Again, you've got to going back to that diagram that I shared on culture. If you say change your socks, but you don't have policies in place that reinforce it, PTO policies, family leave policies, things like that, then your values are bullshit.
Yeah.
Don't ever be in a place where your values are bullshit. Sorry.
Taking note, it's going to be called, we say bullshit. We call bullshit here. I'm saying, taking a note, check for blisters. Check for blisters. This is what the metaphor is. I love it. I saw Russell put his hand up after me, so I'm going to pass it over to Russell. Thanks, Jake.
Of course.
Thanks, Beth. Hi, Jake. Work with our partners, our sales partners and channel partners here. Clearly, the message is loud and clear about our vision as an organization and our story. But what importance do you attach to working with partners who have that same mission? And is there value to working with partners who have perhaps diverse missions and differing missions or different mandates? How much do you enforce upon them, and how much do you take from them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think because we were relatively successful early, we had a lot of people that were coming to us and saying, "Oh, Team Rubicon, you should consider expanding your mission to do X and Y and Z." And some of them were maybe pretty adjacent to what we were currently doing. Some of them were way off in left field. But I took very little from the macroeconomics class that I took in college, but I did take one thing, which is nations should do what they do best and trade for the rest in economic theory. And so we've taken that philosophy at Team Rubicon, to do what we do best, partner for the rest. We're not going to be the best in the world at everything. We want to remain laser focused on what we think we can be best in class at, but we know that that's not everything that is necessary in order to get the job done. It's just one component of it. And so we are always aiming to partner to fill in the gaps of what we can't be best in class at with best in class partners. So we've always taken that approach. I think the idea of partnership is one that we learned on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. You often found yourself out on a battlefield, working alongside a British unit, calling Danish air support, coordinating with, a Finnish artillery unit. And so, hey, you got to get it right. If you don't treat all those people with respect, you're going to have a bad day. So it's kind of deeply ingrained in what we do.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. I think over to Dean next.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. Thank you, Russell. Thanks so much, Jake. That was amazing. I had one of my kids behind me listening to some of this. He says, "Well, Dad, you got to get me that book too." He's pretty excited to read it. So Jake, leadership, I feel it's a personal journey, and it sounds like leadership opportunities are offered in your experiences. Do you think they can be taught as well, or is it by example, or what's the best way to encourage that leadership growth in individuals?
Yeah, I think I don't think leadership is innate. I think it's a learned habit. And I think that there's a lot of people learn in different ways, but I ultimately think leadership is a contact sport. So, you should be well read, but if you're not out there practicing leadership, then you're just not going to improve, because again, it's hard work, and it takes a lot of investment. So it doesn't mean you always have to learn it, on the battlefield or in the boardroom. If you need to go and practice your leadership, go join a rec softball team, go start, a club, in whatever your interest is, and find opportunities to lead. Because again, I think it's, I can't take credit for the phrase. It was Art Delacruz, who some of you might know, our now new CEO, who talks about leadership being a contact sport. And I couldn't agree more.
Great. Thank you, Jake.
Fantastic stuff. Nick, do you want to wrap it up? I know we want to be cognizant of Jake's time as well.
I guess we wanted to thank you, Jake, for coming today to speak to our team here at Sparkrock. And we've been a fan of Team Rubicon for a long time. I've kind of run into you at conferences where you've spoken about the work you've done, and in particular, the investments your organization's made into technology and the belief of how the technology will heighten the impact your organization makes. So always been very impressed with the work you've done. I was inspired by your book, which led us to here. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to have you. I think the group has way more questions they'd love to ask you. So let's hope in the future we'll have another opportunity to have you with us. We wish you have a great weekend. All the best. And really exciting new venture, Groundswell, by the way, that Jake has underway. I have no doubt it's going to be another resounding success based on the work you've done, even with Team Rubicon. It's going to be, you look like you have a great start to that. So thank you. Loved everything you said. So much wisdom that was imparted. I think on behalf of the team, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Yeah, well,
thanks, Jake.
Thank you. Take care.